Man like Mark Sullivan, the warrior yourself. Stay tuned for the thrilling episode. Woo!
A positive mental attitude can clear away all obstacles which stand between you and your major purpose in life.
This is the Snowboard Project featuring Mark Sullivan and the Beat. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project.
Welcome back to the Snowboard Project. I'm Mark Sullivan.
And I am the Beav, and we are hanging out here in Ketchum, Idaho at the Snowboard Project Studios. Coming at you today with a name that I haven't really heard of.
Yeah, this is Chris Copley, and you probably wouldn't have heard of him unless you were around the snowboard scene in New England in the 80s and 90s.
Definitely wasn't. Nope.
Okay, well, Chris Copley was the sales rep for Burton Snowboards. And so I think he started in-house being the team manager for Burton. And actually, he announced the U.S. Open before I did. He was of a long-time announcer of the U.S. Open of snowboarding. But then he became the sales rep for Burton Snowboards and grew it from a few $100,000 to like $15 million a year in a single territory. Yeah, it was pretty incredible. Like, he really kind of rode that tidal wave of Burton's growth through its success.
All right, well, sounds like an interesting guy. Should we roll into him?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, episode 28.
Chris Copley. With Chris Copley. Chris Copley, you might not be familiar with the name, but you were a Burton rep from what time to what time? When were you a rep for Burton? On the East Coast, like in the Central Territory?
Yeah, I started in 1991, and I repped all the way till 2008 is when I got out of the game, and it was great to see, the growth of the sport, but also, just a lot of the folks that I worked with and that worked for me as an independent sales rep, seeing them move on to really great careers in, all types of different things, but some of them affiliated with snow is really satisfying, as well as, just running a successful business for on the sales side for a long time.
Yep. Now let's roll back the tape a little bit to the very beginning of you working for Burton, because you had probably the number one territory for the number one brand in the world. How did you become the sales rep in New England for Burton?
Well, when I started with Burton, I was on the marketing side. So when I started with Burton in 1989, there were 38 people that worked for the company. And I would do anything. I would, pack boxes. I would work in accounting. I would answer the phones. And then I ended up working with the person who was doing marketing. And they said, hey, we need somebody to, travel with the team and make sure that they're taken care of. And so I was the team manager for 3 years with Burton, and I got really good at spending Burton's money. And then they said to me, hey, why don't you try to make us some money instead of spending the money? And I said, all right, I'll give that a shot. So that's how it all happened. And I traveled to almost 80 countries with Burton, and that was amazing. But it was cool to then see the business from another side, which was on the sales side. So that's kind of how it worked.
Yeah. So you were like team manager to Craig Kelly and Brushy and Terrier. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but when I started, it was a very unusual transitional year. So the beginning of pro snowboarding, was more of like the Andy Coughlin era. And, there was an East Coast contingency and there was some West Coast players, and there was alpine snowboarding was a big part of it, and freestyle snowboarding was kind of very new. So when I came in, it was this transition where alpine was kind of being shelved, and these new riders who had, a lot more understanding of like what was happening in skateboarding and really exciting things. Half pipe started to come in. And so when Burton signed Craig Kelly, the first film project I worked on was a film called Chill. And that was where we were trying to mimic the Bones Brigade, what those guys were doing, where you just took a select group of riders and you just said, all right, let's promote them really heavily. And that's where the movie Chill came out. And so that was, where Brushy and Craig Kelly and Keith Wallace, their personalities really started to come through. Cool. And it was just great. We got to travel with those guys and really promote snowboarding all over the world. And that's where the transition, I think, goes from like Andy Coughlin, then it went to like Craig Kelly, and then Craig Kelly taught Brushy how to kind of be the man, and then Brushy kind of taught Hawkinson, and then Hawkinson, then Sean White. When I was there, Sean was like, I think he was 8 years old. So right. I kind of have seen the whole pro snowboarding arc from starting with Coughlin in the late 80s all the way to Sean White now.
Oh, that's some kind of perspective. So just out of my personal curiosity, can you tell the backstory behind the Mystery Air? Because that's a board. I saw one online for sale for like $7,000. And I was like, wow, that was like the board that kind of bridged that gap from basically being more race oriented to really being freestyle oriented as a brand. So what's the backstory behind that board?
Well, when Jake Burton, he was very competitive with Tom Sims, and there was a whole period of negotiation where Craig was kind of not that happy with what was happening at Sims, and Craig ended up signing with Burton, but there was this whole lawsuit that went along where they had to Craig came over to Burton and worked with the R&D department and developed this board, but he had to ride it with no graphics on it. So it was a mystery. And there was a very famous ad of Craig doing a lean air, and you can see the moon in the background, and the ad said, "Free at last," because Craig had to ride for a full season with no graphics on his board, no stickers. And that was a court mandated document. And so Craig abided by that, but then, so we ran this ad, "Free at last," and then Craig was riding this board, and a lot of people were asking, like, what's that shape? And at the time, it wasn't a true twin tip, but the kick on the nose and the tail, it was a little more snubby in the shape, and it was kind of a revolutionary shape. The side cut was really interesting on that board. But the big thing with it was very, very lightweight. And at the time, inserts and boards, they were heavy. The base materials were heavy. The edges were real thick. So Craig wanted like this more minimal type of board, and worked with this very talented board designer named Paul Wren, and they came up with this killer shape. And so that was the shape Craig was riding, and all the questions that people were saying, what's Craig riding? It was a mystery. So that was the Mystery Air. Right. It was a way of saying that Craig rode for Burton without actually saying Craig rode for Burton, kind of. Exactly. And then when we could actually commercially sell it, we did call it the Mystery Air and had a very like simple, minimal type graphic on it. And all the riders were like, hey, this is the board that they wanted to ride. And a lot of other boards were derivatives of that shape that Craig came up with. Yeah, it seems like the next year, like the pizza board was maybe a little narrower, a little more refined. And that was the board that really kind of defined the shape of modern snowboards, really almost until this day, as far as having like a kicktail, and being more center, not quite a twin tip, but that was the board that kind of revolutionized the game as far as freestyle boards go, and making freestyle boards widely available, it seems like. I mean, I will say, Sims was ahead. Like Sims was doing, boards that had a big kick tail, and they was a lot of those boards, like the whole way bindings were key nutted, or like they had mounting plates. Burton was using like an insert pattern, and actually on that Mystery Air, I believe, I gotta think about this again, but I think it had two stance widths where you could actually put your back foot a little further back, and that was what Craig had asked for, was a little bit wider stances. But at the time, a lot of folks were riding kind of knock-kneed, where your knees were together.
Yep.
And so that was another kind of like revolutionary thing, was bringing the stances out a little bit wider, and having these inserts in the board and not a mounting plate where you just drilled the bindings into the top. So like brands like Kemper and some other ones had some kind of interesting shapes, but it was all like Lamar boards and stuff like those boards you had to drill, right? You probably remember what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
about,
totally.
Mounting the binding. So that the Mystery Air was kind of, a break from that with two stance widths with inserts already set in the board.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like those two stance widths were actually like, I don't remember exactly what they were, but they were like 17 and a half and 19 and a half, which would be like super narrow by today's standards. It's like now it's like
exactly.
21, 23, 24, anything you want, But they don't even get that narrow. You can't even mount your board as narrow as like those bindings almost, if you wanted to.
Exactly.
So then
we're getting deep in nuance right now. We're getting deep into some minutia.
I know. So let's talk about being a sales rep now. So then you make this transition to being a sales rep, and you walked into, I guess, being a sales rep in like a really kind of good territory for Burton. What was that like your first year out being a sales rep? What did you have to learn kind of the hard way as far as being a sales rep from being a marketing guy, like you said, who knew how to spend money really effectively or sometimes not so effectively? At least you had a good time. But then you had to actually like make the money count and bring in the money. What was that transition like?
Yeah, well, like on the sales side, I'm not a professionally trained salesperson, although once I got into it, I really, would read and listen and learn from some, really, lifelong salespeople that, some of them were in the ski industry and other industries. But when I started, there was a guy who was doing it before me. His name was Todd Kennedy. He was the very first New England rep for Burton. And at the time, I only had 3 states. I had Northern New England, I had Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And at the time when I started, Burton was doing $325,000 in sales for those 3 states. And I had I inherited 21 accounts. And when I finished my career, I was doing $15.5 million, and I had 116 accounts. So over that, 15-year span, it was, or actually more than that, it was 17-year span. I went from 300, a little over 300,000 in sales to 15.5 million. So that was, that was what was happening with the sport. And, eventually I took over Mass, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So I had 6 New England states. And then towards the end of my career, I was also handling national accounts, which was Dick's Sporting Goods, and also selling off-price goods to, a retailer like, Ross's and TJ Maxx with like leftover soft goods, not hard goods, but leftover soft goods product. So it was like there were different levels of the career where it was, dealing with small independent retailers, dealing with chains. It was like ski market controlled kind of the greater Boston area. And they were, that was like a 20 store chain. And then that led to, doing some national account work as well.
So maybe you can kind of, because you were dealing with like both sides of the coin as far as like these kind of macro multi-store deals to like the mom and pop. What was the difference in dealing with those like small accounts versus kind of these macro accounts that had multiple stores, or even like Dick's Sporting Goods, which is like a national chain, and I think was back then too?
Well, what was interesting is most of my career was all pre-internet, and what was happening in the early part of my career was mail order. And if you looked at the windsurfing industry boomed and then busted, and the mail order part of it is basically what destroyed the industry. Everybody knew how to get a deal. Nobody was paying full price. Retailers stopped, carrying lots of inventory, and it became like just a niche sport. So when with Burton, some very strategic decisions were made very early that we were not going to sell mail order. And when we sold our product, we only sold our soft goods through, like people would get a catalog mailed to them and they're like, why are you mailing me this catalog and I can't buy anything from this catalog? This pisses me off. So we started selling just our soft goods because the soft goods line was big and the retailers could never carry and represent the whole soft goods line. So what we did was, at the time there might have been, 16 different boards in the line, and most retail shops would carry like almost all of those boards. And then as the line started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So to answer your question about mom and pop retailers, what was really fun initially and also unusual was that these retailers, they weren't snowboarders. We tried to encourage a lot of these old ski shop folks to come out, try snowboarding, but we encouraged them to hire, young, dynamic people to not only work their sales floors, but also help on the buying side. Mm-hmm. So all these young, smart kids were getting involved, and, some of them developed nice careers for themselves. But I really enjoyed that, was showing some of these old school retailers that, there's an opportunity here, like merchandise the product, make it its own little section, and really develop this as a category, advertise, let people know you're carrying it. So that was fun to like help these smaller retailers develop a profit center that they never had in their store before. And then on the bigger level, someone like Dick's Sporting Goods, a lot of people say, hey, they have no business being in this business because they're not committed to it and blah, 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 and all this stuff. But there is, like, Dick's Sporting Goods in a lot of parts of the country. That's the only place you can buy sporting goods, like in Illinois, in Ohio, and, some of these more, these other outposts. That's the only place you could actually physically go in and pick up a snowboard, flex it, and go, okay, this is what I want. I do think big box stores in general, I'd much rather see specialty not only get the sale, but specialty thrive. And, that was one of the reasons why I exited the industry, because there were some big decisions that were being made that I knew were going to radically disrupt my ability to continue to be as successful as I had been. And one of them was in 2008, Burton made the decision that they were going to sell their product over the internet. And it's pretty amazing that Burton waited all the way till 2008 to allow their product to be sold online, because you could buy every single type of product online in 2008. But you know what you couldn't buy in 2008? You couldn't buy a Burton snowboard online. So that was a big, big thing that changed the whole industry. And what I think that really ruined specialty business.
Right. Was that decision made based on like driving continued growth, or was it just like the writing's on the wall, folks? The internet is here; it ain't going anywhere, and we're actually going to start shrinking if we don't do this. We have to do it now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you could buy, every single, like you could buy, a washing machine. You could buy a Taiwanese wife, you could buy a dildo. Everything was available like online. So why isn't Burton sold online? It's ridiculous. So
right.
I used to tell retailers this and say, listen, you guys, you've had the longest window with this golden bubble. Okay, now this is going to happen at some point. I was prepping them for 3 years that at some point Burton is going to sell direct. Mm-hmm. And that, in 2008, when they said we're doing it, that's when I said, I don't want to be taking the bullets from every single retailer looking at me saying, hey, I just ruined your business. It's like, well, it was a market force that I couldn't fight against,
Hey folks, if you're tuning in to us still, please take a minute to go to Patreon.
Wait.
What?
Is there like some question that they wouldn't still be tuning in?
Well, if they're still listening, they can go to patreon.com/thesnowboardproject.
But you're still staying still.
Still.
Like they
might
not
have
have
just
even
listened
made
to
it
the
this
first
far.
5 minutes. Yeah, they might not have made it this far. So.
Okay.
But I just want, if you're still listening, Okay, if you're listening, go to patreon.com/the Snowboard Project, and we're going to count on you guys to support an independent voice in snowboarding media. It's how we're going to keep this thing advertising free and have a voice that is not affected by the advertisers. Right. Now, do you see, like, with this much hindsight now, do you see a correlation between the growth of internet, not Burton in particular, but like the growth of internet sales and like what you were just mentioning about windsurfing and how kind of mail order ended up like tanking that industry? It first probably helped it grow initially, but then eventually you never got that sales and service. Do you see something similar in internet sales today?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's no like amazing insight or revelation. We're at the same point with Amazon. Like, Amazon is crushing every independent retailer. So if you go and you support Amazon, you're supporting the elimination of brick and mortar retail. And it's the same thing. If you buy snowboard gear online direct, you are supporting the demise of independent specialty snow retail shops. So like in Vermont, we have this amazing retailer called Darkside Snowboards, and they are as hardcore, pure, you know Bill Langland, that guy's still doing it at the pinnacle way that's the way snowboards in a perfect world should be sold. You walk into a specialty shop, everyone in there is so passionate, they know everything about the product, but that's just not realistic, But it's nice that there are still these like pristine versions of like the way that it could be, and kind of the way it used to be,
Right, but I think like the dark side, I mean, they have the advantage of being directly at ski areas where it's like, oh, I broke my board, I need to replace it right now so I can finish my vacation. Whereas if you're a retailer in New Haven, Connecticut, or somewhere else like that, it's like there isn't necessarily a huge advantage to being right there, and where he maybe has the ability to keep going with that old school model because of the proximity to the actual use of the product. Do you think that's a good thing?
I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, but I could counter that. There was an amazing retailer called Sunny Breeze Sports in Maine, and what his philosophy was, if you build it, they will come. If you're the best, you're a destination. Doesn't matter where you are. He was in Bridgeton, Maine, which is this teeny little town. And I mean, he was doing, just with Burton alone, he was doing $350,000, almost $400,000 in sales. And, that was a tiny little location, but they were so passionate and so connected into the market that they weren't at a resort, and you had to drive a long way to get there, but people would do it because they were the focal point. They were the epicenter of snowboarding. So there, I believe that if you're the best, if you do it, they will come to you, but not everybody is a risk taker like that and knows how to build that real premium specialty experience.
Yeah. And, it seems like just with Amazon, it's like, because you can get anything there, you can get a book you can't find at a Barnes & Noble. You can get, whatever. You can get anything on Amazon. And so then people, after they buy books, they can't find it. After they, find a part for their car they can't find. It's not as big as a bridge to cross to say, oh, I'm going to buy a snowboard there too. Versus like, hey, there's actually maybe a line in the sand that exists for some people but doesn't for other people, as far as like, you are going to kill the snowboard shops if you take that same business you're putting into bookstores or whatever and put that into snowboards.
Yeah, and I'm just for your people who are listening to this podcast, please, people, do not do this. Don't walk into a specialty shop and use the salesperson's time and try on 4 pairs of boots and go, dude, thank you so much. I'm going to order these online, and walk out the door and then go, oh, I can get it online for $20 less. that's my middle finger right in your face, saying, please do not do that, because
that $20 is the value added, right? That's the value added by the shop. That $20 difference is like, that's the salesperson's hour or 2 hours time they spent with you, and the overhead on their rent and everything else that goes into having that brick and mortar location, and it is like a product where it's not like a book where it's like, hey, it's the same no matter where you buy it from. Snowboard boots you want to try on. A snowboard jacket you want to make sure it fits right and you look good in it. Versus like a widget, anything you could buy anywhere. It's the same whether you buy it from A, B, or Z. It's not exactly the same with snowboarding where it's like having clothes that fit, having a board that you flex, and it matters. It makes a difference,
Yeah. And so I'm like, lessons learned from being in retail, doing retail, being, selling. It's like, have respect for the people that build these shops, buy this product, inventory it, put people to work, like support them, man. Like retail is brutal, man. It's tough, and when you find, like, pay a little extra for having this in proximity, or look at how killer these displays are. They really take a lot of pride in, in what they do, and support that, Anyway, that's my on my soapbox rant.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's good to hear, because I don't think everyone really kind of does that math in their head where they're like, wait a minute, I can get it cheaper, and like low cost is like the primary directive for a lot of consumers, versus like, well, wait a minute, it's actually more than the price, right? You're getting more than the price when you walk into a shop. You're getting the culture. You're getting, you're making sure you're 100% sure that thing is going to fit. You're not just sending it back and getting a different one, and that doesn't work, so you send it back and get a different one. It's like you're getting the right thing, the right time, walking in and walking out with that product. And you're assured that it's going to be the right thing for you when you do that, and talk to an experienced salesperson. And that doesn't, you can't do that through snowboarding. So let's talk a little bit about just the mechanics of being a sales rep. Like, what is involved with actually being in the past, I mean, I think it's probably different today based in our internet era, but like, what was it like being a sales rep kind of when snowboarding was booming and shops were growing every year? What did you have to do as a sales rep to keep growing and doing a good job with that?
Well, so the yearly cycle kind of, it depends where you want to start the year off. But if you start the year off in August, all the product, from the previous year, it ships in August. So what you do as a rep is and I had a team of people that worked for me, and we would go around and we would do clinics. So we would teach every single shop. It was required that we gave at least one sales clinic where we would go over the hard goods and the soft goods line and teach the employees all of the features of the product. So August into September, there were usually big sales and promotional events where you would work those events, and the retailer would, have a sale, or they would buy a lot of previous year's products, which are called closeout products that were discounted. And so your responsibility in the fall was supporting the buy that the retailer had made. So you're doing sales clinics, training staff, you're working sales. Then you come into like November into December, and the next season's product line, you show it. And so you're responsible for doing trade shows or setting up your own showroom and inviting the retailers to come and see the next year's product line. What they're doing at that point, November into December, you usually would have a company sales meeting where they're showing you all the new products, teaching you about the features. Then you go and you show it to all of your retailers. Then you got like holiday periods. So you're doing, the snow starts to fly, you're doing on snow demos, bringing people snowboarding, bringing shop guys snowboarding, getting them to try the product out. And then you would have like national shows. At the time back then, the show was in Vegas. Now the national show is in Denver. Other companies have kind of decided not to do the national shows, but the national shows were always great because there was a tremendous energy around seeing what other brands were doing. There was a lot of debauchery at the shows. There was a lot of fun, like, just people getting together. And so the national shows would happen, usually in January into February. You'd have some other trade shows. And then, the later in the springtime, you would have, some big events. Like for us in New England, we had the U.S. Open, and that was a big draw, kind of like a season ending kind of event. And we would, do like retailer parties. We would still be doing on snow promotions and demos all throughout the winter. And then you come into the late spring, and you're kind of getting a little bit of a break, usually like you're doing, selling to rental shops and all that into like April. And then like May, June, and July, you would have a little bit of a break. And then we would have like a summer sales meeting where we would all get together again. And then it was gearing everybody up to go out into the clinic season and getting people ready to train staff on the new product line. So it was this year-long cycle, and you'd probably have about 60 days in the summer where it was a little less hustle and stressful. But then we also started, doing alternative lines like footwear lines, watches like Nixon watches, sunglass lines like Arnett sunglasses, like all these things that made the business more of a year-round business. Burton started doing counter-seasonal product like just a soft goods line, really pushing bags year round. So Burton was trying to make the business a little bit more of a year round type of business. Mm-hmm. And, it's with moderate levels of success and failures along the way.
Right. It seems like that's a ton of work, especially compared to if you're just dealing with a handful of online retailers. You're really on the road a lot, going from place to place. Was your primary incentive that you were going to get paid a commission based on your sales, or was it based on the fact, hey, I'm doing something I really enjoy and I could be working in a lumber yard right now otherwise?
Definitely both, but I'm not going to lie. I mean, financially, it was very, very lucrative, because Burton was, the top brand, and we were selling, an extreme amount of product for many, 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 many years. Like, if you look at it categorically with Burton, it's kind of crazy. Like Burton would have the highest numbers of sales in boards, boots, bindings, outerwear, jackets, gloves, hats, bags, like every single category that you could break it down. When the SIA, Ski Industries of America, would do their audits, I mean, Burton's market share was staggeringly high, almost like, in other industries, you never see that, where companies can have 60, 65, even 70% market share when there were hundreds of competitors, hundreds and hundreds of competitors. And so that just showed the strength of the brand. And, I think part of it, it's team, it's marketing, it's product, obviously. But I do think that part of it was, Burton had an incredibly highly motivated independent sales rep organizations representing the brand globally, actually. But the only way they were able to retain all those very talented people was, the amount of money that you would be making was pretty significant. So we were able to hire, big staffs of people. Whereas like if we're competing against like K2 or Solomon, they might only have one tech rep on the road. Whereas with Burton, I might have 7 people on the road traveling around, educating people and stoking people out and doing parties and bringing people snowboarding. So just the scale of it was so different because of the amount of money that we were generating. We would pour it back in on the service side to make sure that, the retailers felt like that's my best investment. I want to invest it with that company because they have my back. They really make sure that product's going to sell through.
Did you ever face any kind of jealousy from people who were working like in-house designing the product or anything like that, and you were out on the road bringing in commissions and driving the actual sales and probably making, I'm guessing, more money than a lot of the people who actually created the product or did the marketing in-house? Was there ever any kind of conflict there?
You know what? I wouldn't say it's conflict, but I do think, in every industry, salespeople make the most money. I mean, that's life. Like that's the way it works. If you sell, and this is what I used to tell people who work for me, when you learn how to sell, that's a lifelong skill. Like you will always be employed if you're a salesperson, because no matter what, if there's a nuclear apocalypse, people are still going to want to sell, trade, barter, and the people who are the best at that are going to be successful, and they're going to accumulate more wealth because they're in sales. And so, the thing that was interesting is Burton is a competitive place, but it's not. I never saw it as like cutthroat, where like, hey, the product folks were really bitter towards the sales folks. That didn't really occur. The product folks were so stoked on making great product that they were really psyched that the sales reps got so passionate and so into the products that they made. Like, they took a lot of pride in that, and that was very reinforcing for a lot of people to say, you know what, those guys are going out, they live on the road, they're passionate about something I produced. So there was like a symbiotic relationship of respect, and I think that was always there. I never felt like they were bitter towards me for making, a ton of money. There was a sales rep in California who was the largest sales rep in the world for sporting goods, bar none, bigger than any Nike sales rep, bigger than anybody. This guy, Laurent Vernot, was making, his sales were over $70 million. Like, he was doing crazy money, crazy. And actually his peak years were even more than that. And there was a lot of things going on with that. But when you're that was his sales. So you calculate a commission off of that, but still he was making insane money.
Like the CEO of a company or something. Yeah.
But he was killing it, basically.
It seems like, though, part of like the sales process is like learning how to have a smile on your face and take a no. Were you taking a lot of no's back then? Because it seems like Burton was such a huge snowball rolling down that hill that most people were yeses and not no's. Was that part of it too? Learning how to take
it's
no's?
Funny, like the best sales lessons I learned was when I was repping other product lines that weren't Burton. So, like, as an example, when I started repping Arnett sunglasses, I was going into stores that had never sold sunglasses, and we'd get doors slammed at our face. Or Gravis footwear. Gravis footwear was one of Burton's lines. And so when I would go in and try to say, hey, we got these great, they're not skateboard shoes, but they're casual footwear, we got the doors slammed at our face. And I was like, wait a minute, you don't say no to me. Are you kidding me? Like, I sell you hundreds of thousands of dollars on Burton, and so of course you're going to take this in. And those lessons were the best lessons to learn, is that when someone's saying no, is, obviously the cheesy line is, the selling starts when the person says no. That's where like real salesmanship comes in. And for me, like, I had a guy who worked for me, this guy, Josh Hudson, who was probably one of my best salespeople. And I never had him sell Burton. I always had him sell my secondary lines, Analog, Gravis, Nixon watches, because he was so personable. And this other guy, Jeff Brusvin, was another one. They used their personality to sell. And for me, when I was selling Burton, I always told people this, and this is pretty, it's probably, people listening to this would say, oh, that guy's a dick or pretty cocky. But what I would tell people is, I'd say, listen, don't buy this product from me because you like me and I'm your bro and I take you out and party and get you drunk and do all that. Don't buy this product because you like me or I'm a cool guy. I don't want you to do that. You buy the product Burton because it's made well. It doesn't break. Number two, it's marketed really well and it's going to sell. It's going to make you money. Don't buy it because I'm in your store broing down with you all the time. And so that works when you're in the top of the market. If you're like a second or third tier brand, you do have to use your personality and your relationship selling for your product to be able to, get placed in the store. And then also, how is that product going to sell through? If you're bros with all of the staff, like as an example, this is my example. This incredible retailer was called Eastern Border in Massachusetts. You know these guys really well.
Yeah.
They were Burton haters. When I picked up the line, they were like, Burton, we carry it, but my crew, they don't ride Burton, they don't care. They want all the alternative brands, Mm-hmm. And then I put this guy, Jeff Brusvin, on that account. And Jeff is an incredible skateboarder, an amazing snowboarder. And Jeff was able to like crack the code, the Eastern Border code, and Eastern Border sales started to go up dramatically, and the boards would sell out of the store. And even though a lot of the hardcore kids, they weren't going to ride Burton, but they knew like, hey, this is the right product for a lot of the kids who are coming in here, or the parents feel very safe and comfortable buying, you know, a Burton because X, Y, and Z. You know, it's good product, it's made well, it doesn't break, there's a lifetime warranty on jackets, and you know, so Jeff used his personality to take, you know, sales away from other brands. And so, but for me, when I was repping, you know, then I kind of moved more towards management and not so much face-to-face sales repping. That was a lesson I learned, that when you put the right person in place, your relationship does matter. But in the initial phase when I was selling, I didn't want to use it and say, hey, buy the product for me because I'm the cool guy or whatever. It's like, no, you buy the product because it makes you money and for all these other reasons.
Oh, hey guys, Beeve here with Sullivan, and we're talking about Patreon. I know, it's one of those things that we gotta throw in there, but check this out. It's because of people like you that go and get on the internet and go to Patreon and support us for as little as what, $2 a month?
Yeah.
It's people like you that help us do this.
Yeah, but people are like, no, it's free. It's a free podcast,
right.
Steve. We don't need to pay for this. We can get it for free.
Yeah, I know.
The way that we're going to tell these independent stories is by having people support us. Right now, we got about 108 people supporting us. Not a lot.
108?
108.
Still pretty rad.
It is pretty rad, yeah.
There's 108 people out there that are supporting us on Patreon.
Yeah.
Right on.
You know, with your support, as little as $2 a month, we can continue to push this ball downfield to continue to tell these real stories in snowboarding.
Did you ever feel like in hindsight that you had oversold an account or kind of put product in there that maybe, or helped them buy product that maybe actually didn't end up working in the end? Did you ever have one of those situations?
You know what? I'm going to be honest there. I would actually say no, but I will bring this story up. Towards the end of my career, I kind of started to get a little bit overwhelmed with the size of the Burton product line. Like, we would develop board categories, and there were the boards were very close to being the same product, but we did a little tweak here and there just to fill a price tier. Like, we have boards at $300. We need a board at $350. We need a board at $380, and then we need a $400 board. Really? Do you really need 4 price points, in there? And so there was a point, same thing with jackets, and it was, we were creating more product than I actually thought the market A needed or B could actually handle.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a point where the product line just became so grossly bloated in terms of the size of the product line. The product was all still good product, but I was like, this is like gloves. Our glove line was 75 SKUs of gloves. And I'm like, really? You don't need that many gloves. So that was the one thing. It wasn't that it was how I was selling it in, but it was the sample line and just the amount of space you needed to show all that product. And I'm like, maybe out of that product, only 60% of that product is actually going to sell into the retailer. So I'm like, the R&D and the samples and everything to even make the sample line for the global sales rep force for Burton that kind of creeped me out after a while. I was like, man, there's a lot of excessiveness that you could really trim this thing down and be
Where did that
a buddy
come
of mine
from?
who
Where did having four price points in when $100 or whatever? I mean, whatever the case was, but where did that come from?
With when you're growing a business, more is more. A lot of times, that's the American mentality. Feed that beast. If this is selling, add more until what is the breaking point? Where is that? And you will find that out. And Burton, we learned lessons, and we don't need 27 boot models, for men, you just don't need that many. So that strategy is you have these big sales targets, these goals out there, and you're like, how are we going to get there? So the idea is, well, if you just keep adding more SKUs usually means more selection, which more people are going to buy, and then that's going to build a bigger base. And so it's that's basically American Business 101. Add more SKUs. More SKUs usually means more dollars.
Right.
And that's kind of the way it is.
Yep. And so maybe it kind of came close to that breaking point while you were there. Maybe it hit it, but then you had this explosion of shops like backcountry.com that could probably actually stock all those SKUs and maybe added to the competitive disadvantage of brick and mortar shops that could only handle, 10 different boards and 10 different jackets instead of here's 80 jackets and 80 boards or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's true. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I think a lot of people see being a sales rep as a way kind of into the industry. What kind of I think you've touched on this already, but what are kind of the 3 tips for people you have who are trying to, break into the industry and maybe as a sales rep? What kind of advice would you have for them being so successful in that field?
I think part of it is, having a retail background it's humbling, especially if you take pride in it and you really want to do a good job. So everything starts with how can you interact on the sales floor? First, you got to learn your product. 2, you got to learn basic selling things, even intros. You walk over to somebody, and if you go, "Hey, can I help you?" What's the person going to say? "No, you can't help me." So there's how do you do an opening? Just even opening conversations "Hey, how you doing? Yeah, hey man, what mountain do you ride at? Oh, really? Yeah, what board are you riding right now?" Get them into a conversation. All these 101 micro sales tips for some young shred that wants to say, "Hey man, I want to learn how to sell. I want to that sales rep who comes in here, I want to be that dude." He rolls in this lifted truck and he gets to shred with all over, and people look at it as "Hey man, that's a pretty glam lifestyle, man. I want to do that." So first is working retail. Second thing, you could actually talk to reps when they come in, or whatever brand you love, find out who the rep is for that brand, and you call them and you say, "Hey man, can I help you out? Can I work a demo day, or can I work a sales event?" And once you kind of get a relationship and you kind of get to know a rep, you can say, "Hey, I want to be part of your organization if you ever have an opportunity to have, bring someone on to be a sales support person." So there's that angle. Someone that might be a little bit older and is, has a career and wants to check out the rep thing, is calling brands and companies and saying, "Hey, what's your distribution network right now?" And if you're either single or mobile, and they might say, "Hey, we have a territory that is going to open up in blah, blah, blah." It might be in New Jersey or something like that. And you say, "Okay, well, I want to be considered as a candidate for that." And, you talk to these, you talk to the sales managers and you find out if there's actually any openings, and it may not be right in your where you live. You might have to move to get that opportunity, and that's with anything. That's bike reps. That's reps for all types of products. You can kind of find out where there's job openings, and if you have a sales background, and you can, part of it, you got to be able to think on your feet. Be able to explain who you are, why you're passionate, how well you know the product category or the brand, And, some of it's shit luck, that like sometimes you might say, they might be like, yeah, man, we're hiring right now. Why don't you send us your resume and we'll take a look at you.
Yeah. Now, would you recommend that you would, like, let's say you were given a job opportunity with like kind of a no-name brand that's just starting out, just because they need reps? Would you recommend just kind of getting that experience, or would you hold out for like a better brand? I know you had the advantage of working for Burton, which was number one when you started, but like, would you start out with a yellow bus type brand or one of these just tiny brands that's now gone today and work your way up? Or would you like kind of work for, wait for a Never Summer opening or start at the bottom at Never Summer, work your way up there versus being a full-fledged rep for another brand?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to, financial, is that like, if you're a small brand, like this was a number that I used to, hold true, but it's, I'm sure, very different now. If the brand isn't doing $1 million in sales, you can't just work it as a commission-only sales rep, because you're not gonna have enough money to even drive around, buy the samples, show the line, hook up some kids, to ride your gear to promote it. So, like, if the line isn't doing $1 million and, at a 10% commission rate, that would mean you're going to get $100,000 that's going to be sent to you, and then you have to manage a whole year of expenses, right, for that $100,000 commission. So
that's not $100,000 in your pocket.
Hell no. Like, that $100,000 is probably more like $30,000, after all your expenses, if you're really hustling and spending the money to, promote the brand properly and do all this stuff. So what I'm saying is that, negotiating with the company to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to do this as a commission-only sales rep. If you want to give me, a salary plus commission, that would be acceptable. Or you say, I need a draw against my future commissions earned, which means every month you're going to get, $5,000 a month, so that you can go on the road and you can, work trade shows and you can promote and you can sell. But to do it all out of pocket on your own, based solely off commissions, that's a tough road. So you got to kind of negotiate that deal with the sales manager of that company, especially if you're doing a second, third, or fourth tier brand. Whereas with a bigger brand, if they're like, yeah, we're doing 3.5 million, the commission's 8% or whatever, they might say, we'll give you a draw against the commissions that you're going to earn, and that money you're going to get monthly, and you use that to, keep yourself on the road and you have money coming in. So, a lot of people could just, all these small brands, they want sales reps for sure. Mm-hmm. But if they don't have any money to support your efforts, especially initially, then it's not worth it. It's not worth it to spend your own money to go out and promote these brands without really knowing if that brand is going to sell through or even be in existence.
Right. And now, are you talking about $1 million per territory, like in your territory that you would be repping? That's $1 million. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Okay, good. Yeah. I mean, I think that's actually really good advice and some I've never heard before, just openly, right? And I'm sure that goes down in the sales rep world, but I think that really can help educate people. So now with let's see, about 10 or 15 years hindsight, is there anything that you would do differently as far as your involvement in snowboarding, your career path, any of that stuff? Is there anything you do differently looking back on things?
Wow, that's pretty big.
I throw overhand, not underhand.
No, that's good. I mean, here's the thing. Like, I think when I repped, I was really, I think I was pretty hard. Like, I was so protective of the preciousness of Burton, and that, like, if because Burton was from New England, I had to protect home turf. Like, if a brand came up and started to eat my lunch, like, I'll give an example. Rome Snowboards, like, yep. Rome, those were ex-Burton dudes, mm-hmm. and they had it going on for a while. They had the whole dirtbag thing, anti-corporate, trying to call Burton corporate, which is so funny because Burton's privately owned. They're not fucking corporate at all. But anyway, someone like Rome, like I took that brand so seriously that they were potentially eating our lunch or taking like really hard-earned dollars off of my table. So I wasn't like warm, fuzzy, and friendly with a lot of the industry because a lot of people, they kind of were, they were drafting off of all the hard work and the pioneering efforts that we put in to help build snowboarding and get these small retailers to actually take snowboarding seriously. Like it was a lot of effort on our behalf. And I'm not saying we did everything. That's not true either. But I think when you're saying like, it's not like regrets. I really don't have any regrets, but I think I would probably be less aggro, even as a rep towards my competitors. I would be less aggro because I did have the lion's share of the business, and I also didn't want to have all of the business. I wanted it to be an industry. Like here's a story from way back. There was a patent that was on a snowboard, and the patent could have shut down the whole snowboard industry. And because what you could do with the patent is you could enforce the patent, and you could go to everybody who was making snowboards and say, I'm charging you a royalty fee of $300 for every snowboard that you sell. They could have said it at anything like that.
Yep.
Burton, Sims, Kemper, all of those could have gone away. Jake Burton negotiated, paid millions of dollars, and actually bought the patent on snowboarding. And way back, like in 84 and 85, it was called Burton boarding. And Jake was like, no, this is stupid. It's not called Burton it's not called Burton boarding. We're calling it's a sport. It's called snowboarding. And so same thing for me. Like I wanted shops to have like a smattering of other boards, other clothing, to make it look like it's not just Burton only store. It has to have more than that. So the competitive side of me, where I'm always like, I'm going to try to get every dollar, every tooth and nail thing that I can get. I'm going to work hard for that. I would probably be less aggro to let like some of the other brands kind of flourish a little bit more. So that's probably, again, it's not a regret, but I would say if I did it over, I would probably just tone it down on my aggroness a little bit.
Okay, so there was a lot of good times. I know I lived through some of those good times. Last question. What's the highlight? What was the highlight? The one thing that sticks out in your mind from the whole career in snowboarding, working with Burton, that like really like your favorite memory?
Wow.
Or a couple, if it's hard to narrow down. Yeah. There's so many good ones,
Well, one of the craziest ones that I got to announce the Aaron style in the Innsbruck Burger Shield. I mean, you're an announcer, but like to walk out, where the Olympic ski jump is in Austria on the microphone, and there's 25,000 people there, and like just freaking out over like people going off a booter. It was surreal. It was like, it's not even really snowboarding, but it was kind of like, wow, this thing has like come to this. This is insane. Like that was crazy. Like, and another one I would say is like when I started, Ross Powers was just this like, just this little kid,
Yeah.
At Bromley, and I was like, his mom, worked super hard, and I'll never forget it. We were at a trade show in Providence, Rhode Island, and we were watching the Olympics. It was Salt Lake Olympics, and watching Ross Powers boost a 20-foot, 25, whatever, 22-foot method, and just watch him win that gold medal. We were watching it like with all the retailers who were at that trade show and just freaking out like how amazing that was. So that was, and I wasn't even physically there, but that kid who came from such humble beginnings to win a gold medal, and was like, wow, like that was pretty special. And then, like the opportunity to snowboard in crazy, like Greenland, like snowboarding in like over your head powder in Japan. Like there's so many crazy things like that. And I remember things like riding a chairlift with Jake, and I was like, Jake, like look at all these people snowboarding like right underneath us on the lift. I was like, doesn't that like trip you out that this is something that you had such a big influence on? And he said to me, he goes, I lose sleep over it a lot. And I said, why? He's like, all these folks, and this was at like a Burton sales meeting, he's like, their livelihood is based on us running this company properly. And there's some really tenuous times where this whole thing could have just like, you could have just fucked the company up and had the thing go down the drain. And to really see how much snowboarding means to Jake Burton and just to even have a relationship with Jake Burton is really amazing that guy is that passionate, and still to this day, he almost died. If you ever tell that story 2 different times, the guy is like regenerated himself. And, last year he had 100 days and he hiked probably half of them at Stowe. So to me, like meeting someone and working with like a visionary person was that's that type of stuff. And the people that I worked with are, they're lifelong friends. And so it's amazing how work, and even when that thing ended, just has such a long tail of just incredible, not only memories, but seeing people that worked for me go on to do amazing, incredible things in the business. I mean, Beth Steele, who worked for me as the, VP of Burton, senior VP of Burton. And, she started with me and didn't know the first thing about snowboarding and worked for me for 10 years. Like that stokes me out beyond belief that her whole life, and she has a family and a career that came from snowboarding, where she didn't come into it like passionate about snowboarding. She came into it as a job, and then she was just so damn good at it that here she is, a senior VP of, the number 1 snowboard company in the world. So, I mean, dude, I could go on and on and on and on and on with like memories and things that stoke me out about it. But 20 years doing that game, pretty, I mean, I'm set up, in a really good way from snowboarding, and I'm eternally grateful for it.
Cool. Well, what a great interview. I learned a lot, and I heard some awesome stories, too. Chris Copley, you're still the man. That's pretty amazing. Cool.
Well, now I sell weed, man, so that's the next big thing. So
that's the next
medical marijuana.
Well, I think it actually helps people. It does help people,
No.
Yeah,
I'm on the medical side, and I mean, I was, even when I was doing Burton, I wasn't some big weed head burner, but when you see how medical marijuana helps people that are in some really, really tough positions, it's a miracle plant. It really is. And it's incredible where that whole industry is going now. So, a lot of snow bros are now in weed, and it's a good thing.
Yeah. Cool. Well, right on. Hey, thanks for your time, Chris. What a great, what a great afternoon. Cool. Thank you.
All right, brother. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, man, that was awesome.
I know you've had a lot going on. So yeah, thanks, brother. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for your time.
On behalf of Mark Sullivan and the Beeve, thanks for listening to the Snowboard Project. Remember, ride fast, take chances, dream big, and take action. And for God's sake, don't forget to support advertising-free snowboarding media at patreon.com. The Snowboard Project. The Snowboard Project.